Well, I think it's important to put the current events in Iran in the context of at least recent history throughout the Middle East. And going back to October 7, 2023, was it, when Iran's proxies, in Hamas specifically, and then the next day Hezbollah joined forces in a really extraordinary attack on Israeli civilians. And this, of course, was a moment of truth for the Israelis. The IDF and Israeli society was shocked by the events, by their lack of preparedness, and by the fact that so many Israeli citizens and other nationals were taken hostage, and reacted, as we have known, with a really dramatic set of events that has amounted to the first real reversal of fortunes for the Iranian regime since it came into power in 1979. This was the first really fundamental series of defeats of their proxies and the attacks on their nuclear weapon program. And I think the Iranian people have been watching this and sort of believe that the Iranian regime not only fumbled, but has used the resources of the state in a failed enterprise against Israel and the United States and the Levant and around the region that didn't address the actual needs of the Iranian people. And we see this in the rhetoric and the chants and the placards of the demonstrators, is that they're not angry at the United States, they're angry at their own leadership for diverting precious resources to these unnecessary wars abroad. And that makes this a different moment than we've seen before in revolutionary Iran. The Green Movement of 2009, 2010 is widely regarded as the most serious protests that the Iranian regime faced hitherto after 1979. But of course, the regime had the wherewithal and the resilience to suppress it, which may indeed be the case today. But it is now, again, because of the perception that the regime was overly focused on its agenda outside Iran, is badly faltering. And you also have a leadership that is now 15 years older, and increasingly detached from the trends, social trends in the society, which we have seen as well as an element of this. It's not just about economic misery, but also about social, the gap between the Ayatollah's social and moral standards and the reality lived by normal Iranians. So it is really a fundamentally, dramatic moment here to see what's going to happen next. Well, the closure of the internet, of course, is primarily designed by the Iranian regime to prevent the protesters from communicating with each other. Nonetheless, these protests are erupting all over the country. If you look at the maps, we all see them in the media, the red dots of protests, it's everywhere. And so the closure of the internet is somehow not sufficient to put an end to this insurrection that they're facing. It does have a consequence, of course, that it means that it's also harder for outsiders to get a clear picture of what's happening, but enough information and videos are coming out by courageous Iranians who are using things like Starlink when they can to do so, that we have enough of a picture to understand that this is something that's probably even greater than the Green Movement that I mentioned earlier. And I think, we should be doing everything we can to crack open the internet closure, do everything we can to make sure that the Iranian people are hearing from us, and that they're able to communicate also to the outside world about what it is they're facing. The indicators as to why this moment of protest is more significant and more dramatic than what we've seen before is that, first of all, the regime is on the ropes regionally. Because of Israeli response joined by the United States, they have a dramatic reversal of fortunes. And that undermines their credibility at home. They're not seen as being 10 feet tall. If they can't handle their agenda in the Arab world, perhaps they can't handle their security agenda at home. And secondly, the scale of it is, I think, already, I could be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think it's already exceeded in terms of, sadly, we measure these things by people killed or injured or numbers of protesters, much greater than the Green Movement period of 2009, 2010. Third is the tone of the protests. They're not so much protesting, for example, American, Zionist in their rhetoric policies. They're blaming their own government for the failures in the Levant and for diverting precious Iranian resources to funding proxy movements in places like Lebanon and Gaza that in no way serve the interests of the Iranian people. That's a theme in these protests. I could again be corrected, but I don't believe we've ever heard that before. So they're challenging some of the fundamental elements of how this regime has behaved, not only toward them, but in the region. And that's really significant. Now, what we're going to have to wait and see, frankly, is are there cracks in the regime? So far, we haven't seen that. Secondly, will to sustain this, the Iranian protesters, the movement, have to move beyond uncoordinated but significant protests into something that really shows real courage and sustain challenging in the face of the resistance of the security services. And that's going to be really hard. And as best I know, I don't know who the leaders are, if there are any real national leaders behind all of this. And at some point, that is also important to sustaining an insurrection.